So this secret society, or more correctly, semi-secret, because everybody knows about the society, but you don't know the details of what goes on unless you're a member. That society is called Gohu. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. But just some facts about the statues themselves. They can be anywhere from about 3 to 9 feet tall. They're carved from species of hardwoods. They resemble human males in very abstract forms, such as this one. And they must be carved and installed by specialists who are members of that secret society called Gohu. Well, the Gohu Society itself is a fraternal organization, and it's very much like the Rotary Club or the Lions or the Elks Club, any of these fraternal organizations that we are familiar with. Basically, there are branches in neighborhoods, just as there are with the Rotary or the Elks, etc. To become a member of Gohu, you have to be nominated by other Gohu members. And you are nominated if you are not only an elderly man, but an especially respected male elder, respected for your wisdom or your ability to adjudicate disputes and to be very fair and so on. And then when you're nominated, if you accept membership, you have to pay rather considerable fees by local standards to join the Gohu Society. So it's an elite group. So when a Gohu member dies, it's incumbent upon his family to commission a Gohu carver to carve one of these statues and to install it. And by local standards, this is rather a considerable expense. It cost, when we were doing research in 2001, about $200 to pay the carver and to pay for a feast that accompanies the installation of one of these statues. The statues are typically put at the edge of homesteads, a little bit away from the ordinary statues that you saw, because they are believed to be especially powerful. Now, an installed kigangu, or one of these memorial statues, is believed to be the incarnation of the deceased. So we can think of the statues somewhat like tombstones, but actually as more than tombstones would be to us, because these people believe that the statue itself actually contains the spirit of the deceased, hence the need to go and speak to it, to give libations, to pay respects. And the Mijikenda people have an actually explicit prohibition on moving one of these statues. These homesteads actually move every dozen or so years. When the fertility of the farm is exhausted, they actually get up and move to a new location, build a new set of houses, and so on. But there's an actual rule that says you may not take these statues with you, because the ancestral spirit is believed to be so powerful that you may not disturb that spirit. And you have to leave those statues behind. And so if you go out far enough out in the bush, as we were doing on this particular day, this is one of my research assistants, we found an old statue just lying on the ground being basically eaten by termites. But that is because of this explicit prohibition on moving a kigangu. So as an anthropologist, I consider this category of statue what we anthropologists call inalienable or singular objects. That is, we know from cross-cultural research that all societies have particular objects that are more meaningful than others, that somehow stand for the entire nation or the entire cultural group or the entire ethnic group, and which are therefore more resistant to sale or commoditization than others. examples from the US would be the Liberty Bell, or perhaps the actual US Constitution document, or the Bill of Rights document. I mean, we would never think of putting that on a global art market and selling it. It stands for the nation. So for the Mijikenda peoples, the commemorative wooden statues that you've seen pictures of so far are like those objects for them. So to uproot a kigangu for the purpose of profit is considered to be a particularly flagrant affront to the ancestors. Okay. Well, I've been working with these people actually since 1983. And in 1985, I was actually doing research on this semi-secret society, the Gohu Society. And as part of that research, I drove out way into the bush to interview this man, who I'm calling Katana, about his membership in the Gohu Society. And he very proudly showed me these two statues that had been erected right next to his homestead, which commemorated his two deceased brothers who had been members of the Gohu Society. He was very hospitable, and I took a few photographs, such as this one. And as I always do, this is always a courtesy as an anthropologist, when I got the photographs developed, I had copies made for him. And it was about a month later that I drove back to give him the paper copies. And when I put those copies of him and his statues in his hands, he began to cry. Because during the month that I had been gone, those two statues had been stolen. And he asked me to help him find the statues. So whenever I was down along the coast, in Mombasa, for example, Kenya's second largest city, I would look in some of these so-called antiquities shops. And I never found Katana's particular statues, but I learned a lot about the trade in these memorial statues. I learned, for example, that it is typically young, unemployed male youths from the Giriama group or some of the northern Mijikenda peoples who steal the statues in the dead of night. They go and they basically either pull them out or they saw them off at the bottom in the dead of night. They take them down to the coast, which is about 30 to 50 miles away, and they sell them to these shopkeepers, and they get about $50 per statue, which again is equivalent to about 3 months of an unskilled worker's salary. I learned that an art dealer from the US visits the Kenyan coast periodically, about every second year. And he rents a container on a freighter, and he fills it up with African stuff. And he specializes in these statues, in Vigangu. He pays the shopkeepers somewhere between $100 and $300 per statue, depending on the quality. So that's a pretty good markup for the local antiquities shop dealer.